My name is Thea, and if you've ever felt invisible at work, if you've ever poured your soul into a project only to have someone else sign their name to it, then I need you to listen. I need you to stick with me for a bit. Because the story I'm about to tell is yours too. It's about the quiet ones, the architects who build empires in the shadows, and what happens when we decide to turn on the lights. And if my story resonates, if it makes you feel seen, do me a favor and hit that like button. Let me know I'm not just screaming into the void here. It started, as these things often do, with a text message. A little gray bubble on a glowing screen that dismantled a year of my life in 7 words. I was sitting at the cheap IKEA desk in my small apartment, the one that always wobbled when I typed too hard. On my laptop, the bestseller list was glowing. Number 1. For a solid minute, I just stared at it. The Colossus, A Life, by Micah Vance. Except it wasn't really. It was by me. I was the ghost, the one who had spent 365 days excavating the man's life, chiseling his messy, contradictory, and often deeply unflattering memories into the heroic marble statue that now sat atop the literary world. A year of my life, 12 months of 6 a.m. starts and 2 a.m. finishes. A year of navigating his ego, of turning his rambling, whiskey-fueled anecdotes into poetic prose. A year of becoming more him than he was. My voice, my structure, my narrative choices, my soul, packed neatly into 400 pages under his name. I had lived in his head for so long, I sometimes struggled to find my own thoughts. My phone buzzed again. It was him, Micah. I smiled, expecting the digital equivalent of a champagne pop. The "we did it" text, the acknowledgement that our shared secret effort had paid off spectacularly. Instead, the screen glowed with a cold corporate blue. The message read, "Thea, thanks for all your clerical help. Your services are no longer required. Final invoice is rejected. My biz manager will be in touch the NDA." Clerical. The word hung in the air, thick and suffocating. It was a poison dart, crafted with perfect, cruel precision. Clerical. Like I was the one who just fetched his coffee and transcribed his mumbles. Not the one who architected the entire narrative. Not the one who found the emotional core of his story when he, himself, couldn't articulate it. Not the one who wrote the sentence that was now being quoted on morning talk shows. My heart didn't drop. It didn't pound. It just stopped. A full, silent, system-wide failure. The silence in my apartment was suddenly deafening. The celebratory glass of wine I'd poured for myself sat on the coaster, its deep red looking almost black in the low light. Rejected invoice. The final payment, the one that was supposed to let me finally breathe, to have a safety net for the first time in years, gone. And the NDA threat, a classic Micah move, a final twist of the knife to ensure I was not only unpaid, but silenced. He was erasing me, sweeping me under the rug of his magnificent success story. He thought I was just a footnote he could tear out of the book. I stood up, the wobbly desk shuddering, and walked to the window. The city lights of downtown blurred into a galaxy of indifferent stars. He really thought he had won. He thought he was the Colossus, standing astride the world, and I was just a nameless girl who'd typed it all up. He thought the story was over. What he didn't know, what he couldn't possibly comprehend, is that I am a much better storyteller than he is. And every good story has a twist. He thought he'd erased me. He was wrong. I had been building my own story in the margins of his, a secret history written in ones and zeros. During our year of interviews, our marathon sessions, where he'd pour out the raw, unfiltered source code of his life, I hadn't just taken notes. I had recorded everything, every boast, every lie, every casual cruelty, every mumbled confession that contradicted the heroic narrative he was selling to the world. I had built an archive, a secret, encrypted digital fortress holding the keys to the real Micah Vance, the one who built his first company on a stolen idea, the one who left his original mentor high and dry the moment he got a better offer, the one whose lifelong love for his wife began while he was still engaged to someone else. The truths he had so conveniently, and with my help, omitted. And as I stood there, looking out at the city that suddenly felt like mine again. My phone buzzed one last time. It was a sent receipt confirmation, an email delivered. Because 5 minutes before Micah's text arrived, I had sent the decryption key. I had mailed the only map to my digital fortress of truth to the one person in the world whose name made Micah Vance break out in a cold sweat. An investigative journalist named Lena Petrova, a woman who didn't just topple statues, she ground them into dust. He thought he was writing his biography. He had no idea he was just giving me the material for his eulogy. The story wasn't over. The prologue had just ended, and the first chapter was about to begin, and it was going to be a bestseller. The immediate aftermath wasn't a storm of rage. It was a vacuum, a profound and terrifying emptiness that sucked all the air out of my tiny apartment. The screen with the bestseller list still glowed, a monument to a victory that wasn't mine. The text message from Micah was a burn on my retinas. Clerical help. It was such a small word, but it was a wrecking ball. It wasn't just an insult. It was an attempt at ontological erasure. He wasn't just saying I did a small job. He was saying the real job, the act of creation, never involved me at all. I didn't exist. My knees gave out. I didn't fall so much as fold, sliding down the wall to sit on the cold hardwood floor. The wine glass was still on the desk, untouched. My body went cold, a deep, penetrating chill that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. It was the chill of being cast out, of being used up and discarded like a disposable pen. For a year, my entire world had been Micah Vance. His life, his memories, his voice. I had willingly, eagerly, put my own life on hold to build his legacy. I believed in the project. More dangerously, I had believed in him. He had been my mentor years ago, the one who gave me my first real writing gig, a junior position at a magazine he edited. He saw something in me, he'd said, a storyteller's instinct. He'd nurtured it, praised it, and then when he needed it most, he'd strip-mined it for his own glorification. The walls of my apartment, lined with corkboards covered in index cards, suddenly felt like they were closing in. Each card was a piece of his life, arranged and rearranged by my hands into a perfect flowing narrative. There was the timeline of his business ventures, color-coded by success and failure, failures I had artfully reframed as learning experiences. There was the family tree, with sticky notes marking the delicate relationships I had to navigate, the estranged brother I had to paint as a distant but supportive admirer. There was a whole board dedicated to the turn, the moment in his life story where he transforms from a scrappy underdog into a visionary leader. I invented the turn. His actual life was a series of lucky breaks and ruthless betrayals, but I had found a thread, a barely there glimmer of a pattern, and woven it into a tapestry of heroic destiny. My gaze drifted to a photo pinned to the corner of one board. It was me and Micah, taken on the day we'd agreed to do the book. He had his arm slung around my shoulder, a big, toothy, confident grin on his face. I was smiling too, a genuine, hopeful smile. I looked so young, so naive. I had thought this was my big break, the project that would make my career. He had sold it to me as a partnership, our book, he'd called it in the beginning. He'd said, "Thea, I can't do this without you. You know how to find the music and the noise. I need my best soldier for this." The word soldier should have been a red flag. Soldiers are loyal, soldiers follow orders, and soldiers are, ultimately, expendable. The flashbacks started then, not as clear scenes but as sharp, painful fragments. I remembered a late-night session in his cavernous, leather and mahogany office. We were trying to crack the story of his first startup. The official version, the one in the book, was that he and his partner, a man named David, had a brilliant idea, but David lost his nerve, and Micah had to bravely buy him out and carry the torch alone. The truth, which I'd pieced together from Micah's own disjointed admissions after his third glass of scotch, was far uglier. I can still hear his voice, that low, conspiratorial rumble. David did all the coding. Thea. The guy was a genius, but a terrible businessman. I handled the money, the pitch. When the first venture capital offer came in, it was contingent on a streamlined leadership, So I told the investors David was a risk. I told David the investors wanted him out. I bought his half of the code for $5,000. 5,000. He laughed, a short, sharp bark that held no humor. The company sold 3 years later for $50 million. I had felt a knot of ice form in my stomach even then. I remember asking him, carefully, if we should maybe frame that part of the story a bit differently, perhaps acknowledge David's contribution more directly. Micah had waved a dismissive hand. He'd looked at me, his eyes losing their boozy haze and gaining a sharp, cold focus. He said, "Thea, we are not journalists. We are not writing a legal deposition. We are crafting a narrative. The world doesn't need the messy truth. It needs a hero. Give them a hero." That was the moment. That was the first seed of my secret plan. It wasn't a conscious thought then, not a grand scheme for revenge. It was simpler. It was a survival instinct. As a writer, I felt a deep professional revulsion at the idea of deliberately burying the truth. So I started a new habit. Our state was a single-party consent state for recordings, a little legal loophole I'd learned about from a podcast, a fact Micah, in all his grandiosity, had probably never considered. I bought a new digital recorder, a tiny, discreet one, and at the start of every session, I would click it on in my pocket. I told myself it was just for accuracy, to make sure I never misquoted him, but deep down, I knew I was doing something else. I was creating a parallel history, an unaltered, unvarnished backup of the truth, my own secret deposition. I built the archive at night, after our sessions. While he was sleeping off the scotch, I was awake, hunched over my laptop. I transcribed the recordings, labeling each file with the date, time, and key topics. I tagged the contradictions, the lies, the omissions. I created a folder called The David Story, another called The First Wife, another called The Tax Shelter. It became a ritual, a quiet act of intellectual rebellion. He was building his monument of lies, and I was building a machine that could tear it down. The archive grew into a monstrous, beautiful thing. Hours and hours of audio, hundreds of pages of transcripts. It was my dissertation on the anatomy of a lie. The technical side of it became an obsession, a way to channel my growing anxiety and disillusionment. I researched open-source encryption tools, learning about AES 256, cryptographic keys, and secure cloud hosting in jurisdictions with strong data privacy laws. It was a welcome distraction, a world of pure logic and order that stood in stark contrast to the moral chaos of Micah's life. I built the digital archive like a fortress, with nested layers of security. It was my intellectual property, my work product, and I would protect it. A different memory surfaced, this one from about 2 months ago. The book was done. We were in the final stages of copy editing. A junior editor from the publishing house, a bright young woman named Sarah, had been assigned to our project. She was sharp, meticulous, and she saw everything. She'd sent me an email late one night. Subject, fact check query. It was a list of a dozen small, sharp questions. She had noticed a discrepancy in the timeline of Micah's college graduation and the founding of his first company. She had flagged that the inspirational professor, Micah credited in the acknowledgments, had actually left the university a year before Micah enrolled. Small things, but they were loose threads. I had to call Micah to figure out how to respond. He was furious. Not at me, but at her. "Who is this little girl?" He'd boomed over the phone. "Tell her to do her job and fix the typos. Tell her she's a copy editor, not a detective." I smoothed it over, as I always did. I crafted a series of polite, evasive answers for Sarah, blurring the dates and reframing the inconsistencies. I was a professional, after all, but Sarah knew. When I sent her the sanitized responses, she simply replied, "Understood. Thanks for the clarification, Thea." It was a perfectly professional email, but I could read the subtext. She saw that I was the one doing the work, the one managing the volatile, insecure man behind the curtain. She saw that I was the architect. Now sitting on my floor, the full weight of the betrayal crushing me, my laptop pinged with an email notification. My body was too heavy to move, but I craned my neck to see the screen. The sender was Sarah. My heart gave a painful lurch. I expected it to be a note of congratulations about the bestseller list, a message that would now feel like rubbing salt in the wound. I was wrong. The subject line was just, "Thinking of you." I finally forced myself to stand, my legs stiff and sore. I walked to the desk, that damned wobbly desk, and opened the email. It was a forwarded internal memo from the publisher's CEO. It was a gushing, sycophantic tribute to Micah's singular vision and courageous honesty. It praised his masterful storytelling. My name wasn't mentioned, not once. I was in the official story of the book's creation, completely and utterly invisible. A wave of nausea washed over me. This was it, the official erasure. But then I scrolled down. Below the forwarded memo, Sarah had written a short, personal note. It said, "Thea, I just saw this. It's garbage. We both know you were the architect of this entire thing. The language, the structure, the heart, it was all you. I learned more about good writing from your manuscript edits than I have in 3 years at this job. Don't let him do this. Don't let him erase you." And there it was, the catalyst, the spark in the tinderbox of my despair. It wasn't pity, it was validation. A single, clear voice cutting through the noise of Micah's gaslighting and my own self-doubt. "You were the architect." Sarah's words were a lifeline. They didn't just make me feel better. They gave me permission to be angry. They reminded me that I wasn't crazy. The work was real. My contribution was real. And it was worth fighting for. The chill in my bones began to recede, replaced by a slow, quiet heat. It wasn't the hot, messy fire of rage. It was the cold, blue flame of a pilot light. Calm, focused, a heat that could forge steel. I looked from Sarah's email to the photo of me and Micah, the smiling, naive girl from a year ago. She deserved better. She deserved to have her work recognized. It wasn't about revenge. I kept telling myself that. It was about correction. It was about restoring a truth that had been deliberately and maliciously corrupted. Micah hadn't just stolen my labor and my money. He had tried to steal my story. Big mistake. I was the one who knew how it was supposed to end. I took a deep breath. The emptiness was gone, filled now with a singular crystalline purpose. I minimized the bestseller list and the email from Sarah. I opened a new secure browser window. My fingers, which had been trembling moments before, were now perfectly steady. I had the fortress. I had the truth. Now I just needed to choose the right weapon to deliver it. Foresight is a funny thing. People mistake it for prophecy, for some mystical ability to see the future. It's not. Foresight is just paranoia in a business suit. It's the quiet, nagging voice that tells you to pack an umbrella on a sunny day. It's the instinct to save a copy of an important email to a personal drive. For me, foresight was born the day Micah Vance told me to trade truth for heroism. In that moment, I realized my job wasn't just to write his story, but to survive it. My plan wasn't a frantic reaction to his betrayal. The betrayal was merely the trigger that activated a system I had been building for 10 months. He thought he was playing checkers, moving his king and feeling powerful. He didn't realize I'd been setting up a chessboard on a different table the entire time. The heart of the plan was, of course, the archive. I called it the vault. It lived on a series of encrypted solid-state drives, backed up to a zero-knowledge cloud server based in Switzerland. Zero knowledge meant that even the company hosting the data couldn't decrypt it. Only the person with the key could open the lock, and that was me. But a vault is useless if no one knows it exists, or if the contents are just a jumble of files. I had spent hundreds of hours curating it. This wasn't just a data dump, it was an indictment. I had organized the audio files chronologically, but also thematically. There was the business acumen folder, containing the recordings where Micah gleefully detailed swindling his first partner, David, and using inside information to sabotage a competitor. Each audio file was paired with a verbatim transcript, time-stamped, with my own annotations in the margins, cross-referencing his claims with public records. For example, next to his boast about a hostile takeover, I'd inserted a link to a news article from the time that quoted him expressing deep regret at his rival's company folding. The hypocrisy was laid bare, clinically and devastatingly. Then there was the personal lives folder. This was the most damning. Micah had built his public persona on being a devoted family man. The book's dedication, which I wrote, was a saccharine tribute to his wife, Eleanor, his rock and his North Star. The vault contained the audio of him describing their first meeting. He'd told the story as a whirlwind romance. The truth, which he'd let slip one evening, was that he was engaged to another woman at the time. A kind, trusting woman he unceremoniously dumped the moment he realized Eleanor's father was a prominent investor. I even had the recording of him laughing about it. He'd said, "It was a strategic upgrade, Thea. Every good CEO knows when to divest from an underperforming asset." He was talking about a human being. I had even built a custom web interface for the vault, a clean, simple, searchable database. You could type in a name like David, and it would pull up every mention of him in the transcripts, every related audio clip, every piece of contradictory evidence I had gathered. I designed it for a journalist. I designed it to be a weapon that required no assembly, just point and shoot. But the plan needed more than just a weapon. It needed allies, not active co-conspirators, but people whose integrity and position would lend my actions weight. My first and most important ally, even if she didn't fully know it, was Sarah, the junior editor. Her email had been the catalyst, but her value was strategic. She was my ear on the inside. She represented the disillusionment of the rank and file who knew Micah was a fraud, but were powerless to say so. Her validation wasn't just emotional, it was a data point that proved my grievance was legitimate. After receiving her email, I waited a day. I let my anger cool and my resolve harden. Then I wrote back to her. It was a simple message. "Sarah, thank you. That means more than you know. You were right. I was the architect. And an architect always keeps a copy of the blueprints. I just want you to know, whatever happens next, that your belief in the work mattered. Stay safe." It was intentionally cryptic. I wasn't asking her for anything. I was just planting a flag. I was letting her know that I wasn't going away quietly, and I was framing my actions as a defense of the work itself, a sentiment I knew she shared. It was a calculated risk, but my gut told me she was on the right side of this. The second piece of the puzzle was choosing the target. I could have leaked the archive on the internet, posted it anonymously, but that would be messy, chaotic. It would be dismissed as the ramblings of a disgruntled employee. No, this required a surgical strike. It required a platform with unimpeachable credibility. It required a messenger who was more feared than Micah was famous. It required Lena Petrova. I remembered a conversation from about 6 months prior. Micah had been on a tirade about the media. He was complaining about a devastating profile Lena had written about a tech CEO, an article that had not only tanked his company's stock, but had led to a board revolt and his ouster. The piece was a masterpiece of investigative journalism, built on meticulous sourcing and the subject's own hubris. Micah had been visibly shaken by it. I remember him pacing his office saying, "That woman is a shark. She smells a drop of blood in the water from a mile away. You never ever talk to Lena Petrova. You don't even return her call. She's the one person who could actually burn this whole city to the ground." His fear was my signpost. He had handed me the name of his executioner. Finding her contact information was easy for someone who'd spent a year as a professional researcher. Getting her attention was the hard part. A journalist like Lena must get 100 tips a day. I couldn't just send a rambling email with a zip file of recordings. That would scream unhinged crank. My approach had to be as professional, as meticulous, and as compelling as the archive itself. I spent an entire day crafting the email. It was a work of art, my own little masterpiece of strategic communication. The subject line was simple, elegant, and irresistible to a journalist of her caliber. Source material for the Colossus. It implied I was an insider. It used the book's own title against it. The body of the email was just 3 short paragraphs. The first paragraph established my credentials without revealing my desperation. "Miss Petrova, my name is Thea. For the past year, I served as the sole ghostwriter and narrative architect for Micah Vance's biography, The Colossus. My contributions have since been officially categorized as clerical. The use of the word clerical was deliberate. It was the hook, the injustice, the drop of blood in the water. The second paragraph established the existence of the vault. Throughout the writing process, I maintained a complete, unabridged, and encrypted audio archive of my 200-plus hours of interviews with Mr. Vance, along with fully transcribed and annotated records. This archive provides a verifiable counter-narrative to the version of events currently being celebrated on the bestseller lists. I used words like verifiable, unabridged, and archive to signal that this wasn't just gossip. It was evidence. The final paragraph was the call to action, and this was where the real chess move was. I didn't attach the key. I didn't even attach a file. That would be too risky, too easy to dismiss or get caught in a spam filter. Instead, I gave her a path. This archive is stored securely. If you are interested in reviewing the primary source material, access can be granted. I believe you'll find the truth of Mr. Vance's story is far more compelling than the fiction he is selling. I didn't threaten. He didn't plead. I presented myself as a calm, credible source, offering exclusive access to a verifiable treasure trove of information. I was speaking her language. It wasn't about revenge, I told myself again as my finger hovered over the send button. It was about journalistic integrity. It was about the public record. It was about the truth. But there was one more piece to the puzzle. A subtle subplot I had been nurturing. It wasn't just about Micah. It was about the industry that enabled him, the publishers, the agents, the publicists. They were all complicit in the creation of these myths. They profited from the lies. My leverage wasn't just the truth about Micah. It was the potential embarrassment for the entire publishing house. They had fact-checkers. They had legal departments. Sarah's query proved they had at least an inkling of the inconsistencies. But they chose to look the other way because the book was a guaranteed moneymaker. My secret plan wasn't just to expose a man. It was to expose a system. With a final, steadying breath, I clicked send. The email disappeared from my outbox and shot out into the digital ether, a silent, invisible torpedo heading for the hull of Micah's unsinkable reputation. I closed the laptop. For the first time in a year, I didn't feel like a ghost. I felt like a hunter. The board was set. The pieces were in motion. All I had to do now was wait for the silence to break. The silence lasted for 48 hours. It was a thick, heavy silence, the kind that presses in on you. It was the quiet before a storm. I spent those 2 days in a state of suspended animation. I cleaned my apartment. I organized my bookshelves. I paid my bills, all except for the one I knew I'd never have to send again. I was preparing my life for a seismic shift, tidying up before the earthquake. I didn't check my email. I didn't look at the news or the bestseller lists. I refused to give Micah the satisfaction of my attention. My move was made. Now, it was his turn to react to my board, not the other way around. The first tremor came not as a roar, but as a whisper, an email from Sarah. The subject was a single cryptic word: tremors. The body of the message was short and electric. Lena Petrova's office called our publisher's legal department this morning. They wanted a comment on discrepancies between the published work and archived source materials. Legal is in full panic mode. They've scheduled an emergency meeting with Micah and his agent. No one knows where the leak came from. The whole building is buzzing. They're trying to keep it quiet, but the walls are thin. I read the email 3 times. A slow, triumphant smile spread across my face. It was working. The torpedo had hit. The phrase archived source materials was my signature. The calling card I had left for Lena. She was using my language, signaling that she took the bait and understood the gravity of what I was offering. The panic at the publishing house was exactly what I had predicted. They weren't panicking because Micah might be a liar. They were panicking because their multi-million-dollar asset was suddenly at risk, and their own negligence might be exposed. This was the first phase of the silent takeover, introducing a destabilizing element into a closed system. I hadn't made a single public accusation. I hadn't broken my NDA, not technically. I had simply offered primary source material to a journalist. Everything that happened next was a consequence of their own choices, their own panicked reactions. The next tremor came 12 hours later. My phone, which had been silent for 2 days, lit up with a name I never thought I'd see again. Micah Vance. I stared at the screen, my heart giving a single hard thump against my ribs. My first instinct was to answer, to hear the desperation in his voice, but I resisted. Answering the phone would be a tactical error. It would put us on equal footing, open a negotiation. My power lay in my silence. My silence was a vacuum, and he would be forced to fill it with his own fear and speculation. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. He called again a minute later. I ignored it again. Then the text started. The first one was aggressive, arrogant. Thea, call me, now. An hour passed. The second text was laced with a hint of confusion. What is this I'm hearing from the publisher? Did you talk to someone? You're playing with fire. Another hour. The third text was the beginning of the pivot. The first crack in the colossus. Look, I think there's been a misunderstanding about the final invoice. Let's talk and clear this up. I value your work. I laughed out loud. It was a sharp, genuine laugh. I value your work. The whiplash was incredible. 2 days ago, my work was clerical. Now that his empire was threatened, it was suddenly valuable. His panic was making him sloppy. He was showing his hand. The true beauty of the plan was its quietness. I was a ghost, after all. I wasn't storming the castle gates with a battering ram. I was sitting in a quiet room across the city, watching the castle's foundations crumble from within, all because I had quietly slipped the real blueprints to the one person who knew how to read them. The next day, Sarah sent another update. He's in lockdown, canceled his appearance on the morning shows. His publicist released a statement saying he has the flu. The Micah flu, we're calling it. His agent is practically living in our legal department. They pulled your original contract and the NDA. They're trying to figure out how exposed they are. This was a critical detail. They were looking at the NDA, Micah's flimsy legal threat. I had reviewed that document with a lawyer friend months ago, long before this began. The NDA covered the proprietary information of the book. It prevented me from revealing the contents of the manuscript before publication, but it said nothing about the raw interview materials. Those were my notes, my recordings, my work product. A plausible inaccuracy, perhaps, in the fine print of contract law, but it was a distinction my lawyer friend believed would be defensible. He had called it a beautifully crafted gray area. Micah, in his arrogance, had used a boilerplate NDA, never imagining his ghost would have the audacity to build an arsenal. His panic was now my primary source of entertainment. He was a man who lived in the spotlight, who fed on public adoration, forcing him into the shadows, making him cancel the victory tour he so desperately craved, was a form of poetic justice. He had tried to erase me, and now he was being forced to erase himself, at least temporarily. The final move of this stage was about cementing the narrative, not my narrative of revenge, but Lena Petrova's narrative of journalistic discovery. She still hadn't contacted me directly for the key, and that was the most brilliant part. She was a pro. She was building her case first. She was using the existence of my archive as leverage. She was shaking the tree, getting official on the record, no comments from the publisher, and Micah's camp. She was cornering them, making their silence look like guilt, so that when she finally published the contents of the vault, the world would already be primed to believe it. I allowed myself a small luxury. I walked to a coffee shop in a different neighborhood, a place where I wouldn't run into anyone I knew. I sat by the window, and for the first time I Googled Micah Vance. The top results were still glowing reviews and articles about his bestseller, but the tide was beginning to turn. On Twitter, a few media insiders were starting to ask questions, hearing rumors of a big story brewing about Micah Vance's The Colossus. Anyone else? Another tweet from a rival publisher's editor read, "Word on the street is that the Micah Vance Victory Tour hit a bit of a snag. popcorn emoji. The takeover wasn't loud. It wasn't a hostile boardroom confrontation. It was a change in the weather. It was the pressure dropping, the sky turning a sickly gray-green. It was the smell of ozone in the air. Micah was still in his castle, but he had to be realizing that the walls were made of paper, and a hurricane was on its way. And I was the hurricane. A quiet, patient, well-documented hurricane. I took another sip of my coffee. For the first time in a very long time, I felt something that resembled peace. It wasn't about revenge. It was about balance. The scales had been tipped so violently in his favor, and I was just a quiet force of gravity, slowly, silently, pulling them back to where they belonged. The power shift, when it came, wasn't a single event. It was a cascade, a series of dominoes falling in slow, satisfying succession. The silent takeover had destabilized Micah's world. Now that world was beginning to actively dismantle itself. The first major piece to fall wasn't a client, as this wasn't a corporate story, but something far more valuable to a man like Micah, his future. Sarah, my faithful source in the belly of the beast, sent me an email with the subject line "Checkmate." Inside was a screenshot of an internal email chain. Micah's agent was communicating with the head of the publishing house. The topic was Micah's next book, a planned sequel to his success story that had a 7-figure advance attached to it. The publisher had just invoked a clause in the contract, placing the deal on indefinite hold, pending the resolution of potential reputational and legal challenges. 7 figures, gone. Poof. Not because of a lawsuit, not because of a public accusation from me, but because of the threat of a story from Lena Petrova. The mere existence of the vault had become more powerful than its contents. His future was being cancelled by an enemy he couldn't see, and a truth he couldn't publicly deny without looking even more guilty. This was when his strategy shifted from aggression to desperation, the desperate countermove. It arrived not as a text, but as a long, rambling email, sent from his personal account at 3 in the morning. It was a masterclass in narcissistic panic. The email was a journey. It began with hollow bluster and legal threats. He accused me of slander, of professional misconduct, of attempting to blackmail him. He threatened to sue me into oblivion, to ruin my meager reputation in the industry. It was the growl of a wounded animal, all teeth and no bite. He knew that a lawsuit would mean discovery, and discovery would mean the vault becoming public record. It was a threat he could never make good on. Then, halfway through, the tone pivoted dramatically. The threats dissolved into pleading. He wrote, "Thea, I know you're upset about the invoice. It was a business decision, not a personal one. My manager can be overzealous. Let me make it right." He offered to pay the final invoice. Then he offered to double it. He offered a special bonus for the success of the book. And then came the real kicker. He offered me a story consultant credit in the paperback edition. I stared at the words story consultant, a meaningless, flimsy title meant to placate me. A few weeks ago, that might have been enough. A few weeks ago, I was a ghost desperate to be seen. But he didn't understand. He thought this was a negotiation about money and credit. He thought he could buy my silence, put a price tag on my erasure. This is a moment I want you to think about. He was offering me everything I thought I wanted, the money I was owed, and a form of public recognition. A logical person might have taken the deal. It was a guaranteed win. The money was real, the credit was a concession. But my decision wasn't logical. It was emotional. It was about the why. He wasn't offering this because he respected my work. He was offering it because he was terrified of Lena Petrova. His apology was a hostage negotiation, not an act of contrition. Accepting it would mean validating his belief that everything, including my integrity, was for sale. It would mean becoming a co-conspirator in his lies, just for a bigger paycheck. I kept telling myself it wasn't about revenge, and in that moment I realized it wasn't about the money either. It was about the principle. The principle that you cannot treat a person like a tool and then offer to pay them for the damages when they finally break. The principle that truth has a value that can't be quantified on an invoice. The final part of his email was the most pathetic. He tried to appeal to our shared history, our mentorship. Don't do this to me, Thea. To us. Think of everything we built together. You're destroying a man's life over a misunderstanding. We built. Suddenly it was we again. The audacity was breathtaking. He had single-handedly tried to erase me from the equation, and now that his own name was at risk of being erased, he wanted to hide behind a partnership that he himself had desecrated. I didn't reply to the email. My silence was my answer. It was a more powerful rejection than any angry words I could have written. Every hour that I didn't respond, his panic would grow. He had laid all his cards on the table: threats, money, pity, and I had simply refused to play. The power had completely shifted. I was no longer the ghostwriter begging for her final payment. I was the silent arbiter of his fate. He was the one sending desperate, late-night emails into the void. He was the one checking his phone every 5 minutes, waiting for a response that would never come. He had made me feel powerless, and now he was experiencing that same feeling, amplified 100-fold. The final domino in this stage was Lena Petrova. She finally contacted me. It was a simple, secure email. Thea, I've seen enough. The publisher is stonewalling, and Vance is in hiding. The fear is palpable. I'm ready to review the source material. Send me the key. The time for waiting was over. The time for silent pressure was at an end. It was time to give the world the story. I opened the vault's interface, generated a new one-time use decryption key, and pasted it into my reply. Miss Petrova, I wrote, as promised, the architect's blueprints. I trust they will be in good hands. I hit send. The key was gone. The bomb was armed, and the power shift was complete. I wasn't just in control of my own story anymore. I was in control of his. The confrontation came sooner than I expected. He didn't call. He didn't email. He showed up. On a Tuesday afternoon, my doorbell rang, a sharp, insistent buzz that broke the quiet of my apartment. I wasn't expecting anyone. I looked through the peephole, and my blood ran cold. It was Micah. He looked terrible. His usually perfect hair was a mess. His expensive suit was rumpled, as if he'd slept in it. His face was pale and puffy, with dark circles under his eyes. The colossus was crumbling. My first instinct was to not open the door, to hide. But that was the old Thea. That was the ghost. The new Thea, the architect, deserved to have this moment. I took a deep breath, unlocked the deadbolt, and opened the door. He looked shocked that I'd opened it, as if he'd been prepared for a long siege. He started talking before he was even fully inside, his voice a hoarse whisper. Thea, you have to call this off. You have to call her. Lena Petrova. Whatever she's paying you, I'll triple it. Just name a price. I stepped back and let him walk into the middle of my living room. I didn't offer him a seat. I just stood there, my arms crossed, watching him unravel. The man who had fired me, via text message, was now standing in my apartment, begging. I let the silence hang in the air for a long moment before I spoke. My voice was calm even. It wasn't about the money, Micah. He stared at me, his mind clearly unable to process a motive that wasn't financial. Then what? What do you want? Do you want to ruin me? Is that it? Is this revenge for that stupid text message? It wasn't about revenge, I said, the words feeling more true now than ever before. It's about a correction, a fact check, something your publisher should have done. He ran a hand through his already messy hair, his composure completely gone. A correction? You're calling this a correction? This is a demolition. You're taking a man's life's work, his legacy, and you're trying to burn it to the ground. His life's work. I felt a sharp, cold anger, but I kept my voice steady. Let's be clear, Micah. You had a life. I'm the one who turned it into a life's work. I built the legacy. I crafted the narrative. And I have the receipts. He flinched as if I'd slapped him. He started pacing my small living room, trapped and desperate. He gestured wildly at the corkboards still on my walls, the architecture of his life that I had designed. Thea, please, we can fix this. A joint statement. We can say the book was a collaboration. We can give you a co-author credit. We'll re-release it. Just call her off. It was incredible. The very things that would have been a dream come true a month ago were now being offered up as sacrificial lambs to save his skin. But it was too late. The machine was in motion. The truth was already out there, waiting. "I have to give you credit, Micah," I said, and he stopped pacing, looking at me with a flicker of hope. "You taught me my most valuable lesson." "What? What lesson?" he asked, latching onto the thread. "You told me that we aren't journalists. We're crafting a narrative, that the world doesn't need the messy truth, it needs a hero." I took that to heart. I just think the world deserves to know who the real hero of this story is, and it isn't you. The flicker of hope in his eyes died, replaced by a look of utter defeat. He finally understood. There was no negotiation. There was no price. This was a consequence. He then asked the question that I knew was coming, the one that showed he still didn't get it. "Hayne, what was it? What was the final straw? The text? The invoice?" I almost laughed. He thought this was about a single incident, a single insult. He couldn't comprehend that it was the weight of 1,000 small cuts, a year of being systematically devalued and erased. I walked over to my desk and picked up my phone. I found the text message he had sent me. I held it up for him to see. "You asked what my contribution was. You said it was clerical. You were wrong. My contribution wasn't clerical." I paused, letting the word hang in the air between us. It was archival. The color drained from his face. The finality of that word, archival, hit him like a physical blow. It was the confirmation of his worst fear. The archive was real, and it was in the hands of his greatest fear. Just then my phone buzzed in my hand. It was a notification, a news alert from the very publication Lena Petrova wrote for. I didn't even have to look at it. I knew the timing was almost cinematic. Micah saw the notification light up my screen. He saw the look on my face. He knew what it was. He didn't say another word. He just turned, a broken man, and walked out of my apartment, closing the door softly behind him. Vindication. I looked down at my phone. The headline was stark, brutal, and beautiful. "The Ghost in the Machine, best-selling biographer, Micah Vance's definitive life story, built on a foundation of lies, archived recordings reveal." The article was a masterpiece. Lena had used my archive with surgical precision. She laid out the truth of the David story, complete with audio clips of Micah boasting about the swindle. She detailed the callous way he'd divested from his former fiancée, juxtaposing it with the flowery prose I had written about his love for his wife. She didn't just expose him. She used my own words, the very narrative I had crafted for him, as the framework to hang his lies upon. She had turned his monument into his pillory. The story wasn't just about Micah. Lena had widened the lens, just as I had hoped. She questioned the publisher's due diligence, quoting Sarah's anonymous testimony about the willful ignorance of the editorial staff. The entire edifice was shaking. It was over. The lie was dead, and in its place, the truth, my truth, was on the front page. I didn't feel a rush of joy or a thrill of victory. I just felt quiet, a deep, profound sense of balance restored. The world had been tilted on its axis, and now it was level again. I was no longer a ghost. My voice was finally being heard, louder than I had ever imagined. The weeks that followed were a blur of quiet vindication. The fallout from Lena's article was catastrophic for Micah. His book was pulled from shelves, the publisher issuing a humiliating statement about a forthcoming revised and corrected edition that everyone knew would never see the light of day. His 7-figure book deal vanished permanently. He was dropped by his agent. He became a pariah, a walking cautionary tale in the industry he once ruled. His removal happened off-screen, a consequence of his own hubris meeting an immovable object, the documented truth. I never saw him again. I never had to. For me, the world opened up. The ghost stepped into the light. I was no longer defined by Micah's shadow. In fact, his shadow had become my spotlight. Lena Petrova, impressed by the meticulous nature of my archive, offered me a job as a special consultant and researcher for her investigative team, a position where my obsession with detail and my ability to see the story behind the story were considered assets, not clerical skills. Then came the book deal, A prominent publisher, a rival of Micah's, reached out. They didn't want a tell-all, not a book about revenge. They wanted a book about the nature of stories themselves, about the power of narrative, the ethics of ghostwriting, and the invisible labor that props up so many of our modern heroes. They wanted my voice, my perspective. The contract was signed, not with my name hidden in the acknowledgments, but printed in bold on the cover. My own name, my own story. Today I'm sitting in my new office. It's not large or grand, but it's mine. The desk doesn't wobble. On the wall, where the corkboards covered in Micah's life used to be, there is just one thing, a simple black frame. Inside it is a printout of a text message. Thanks for all your clerical help. It's not a trophy, it's a reminder. A reminder that the attempt to erase someone is the thing that can make them most visible. A reminder that the quietest voices can sometimes carry the furthest. It was never about revenge. I know I keep saying that, and maybe you don't believe me. But revenge is a hot, messy, fleeting emotion. This was something different. It was cold and it was permanent. It was about reclaiming a truth. It was about taking the power of my own story back into my own hands. My work, my words, my narrative, mine. And that's the real moral of this story. The reason I wanted to tell it to you. Your work has value. Your contributions matter, even when the world, or a single arrogant boss, tries to tell you they don't. You are the architect of your own life, your own career. You draw the blueprints. You lay the foundation. Never ever let someone else sign their name to your soul. Don't let them convince you that your work is just clerical. So if you are out there, feeling invisible, feeling erased, remember this. You are not a ghost. You have a voice. You have a story. And you have the power to tell it. Sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one who holds all the cards. Build your archive. Keep your receipts. And when the time is right, don't be afraid to send the key. Thank you for listening, for letting me share my story. It helps to know I'm not alone in this. If this resonated with you, please do me a favor. Like this video, leave a comment below, and tell me about a time you felt your work was undervalued. Let's make this a conversation. Share this with anyone who needs to hear it. And if you want more stories about reclaiming your power, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell. Let's make sure no one ever feels invisible again.